While there's every possibility for a game to surprise us all with unexpected quality, it's also fair to say that players these days have become extremely adept at sniffing out a dud ahead of time. Considering how pricey AAA games are on launch day though, who can blame them? Sometimes everything about a game pre-release just screams, this is gonna suck, from a reveal trailer to extensive gameplay footage, interviews with the developer, and everything else in between. Again, while games might occasionally shock us by turning out far better than expected, that absolutely wasn't the case with these. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are 20 recent video games everyone knew would suck.
Want to stay safe online and save big? Well, now you can. Right now you can get up to 76% off NordVPN with 3 months free, and all you've got to do is click the link in the description or scan the QR code that's on screen right now to get yourself signed up.
Nintendo Switch 2, welcome to it. Though the Nintendo Switch 2 has been a phenomenal success, like pretty much any console, the launch lineup was a mixed bag, with many expressing not one iota of surprise that Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour was, well, a bit naff. A minigame collection intended to serve as an introduction to the Switch 2's various hardware features, Welcome Tour ruffled many feathers by not being a free console pack-in, with Nintendo instead charging $7.99 or $10 to play it. While you could take that as a sign that Nintendo felt the game was high enough quality to charge for it, nothing in the marketing for Welcome Tour seemed to support that. Come release, Welcome Tour received mediocre reviews for its bare-bones gameplay, especially compared to feature-rich pack-in games like the PS5's Astro's Playroom. Many critics couldn't help but mention the absurdity of the game being a paid product, but even taking financials out of the equation entirely, in terms of pure quality, it's an incredibly sterile, even soulless attempt at onboarding new Switch 2 owners. South Park's Snow Day. It's no exaggeration to say that South Park-themed RPGs The Stick of Truth and The Fractured But Whole are two of the best licensed video games ever made, and so many were keen to see more games based on the IP. While South Park Snow Day is a canonical follow-up to the two aforementioned titles, it's also a very different game made by a totally different team. A 3D co-op hack-and-slash title centered around snow-based fights. THQ were very quiet about this one, so it was easy to give the uninteresting marketing the most uncharitable reading possible. Gameplay looked bland and clunky, and it was a low-effort slice of branded content being churned out for a quick buck. Sadly, that was exactly what Snow Day felt like, a generic repetitive action game with an ugly art style and a bafflingly sanitized approach to the humor that South Park has built its name on. The First Descendant. It's incredibly difficult for even good free-to-play live service games to survive in the current overcrowded market, and pretty much everything we saw pre-release from multiplayer looter shooter The First Descendant made it look like the sort of flavorless generic romp you'd expect an AI to regurgitate. Now, in total fairness to The First Descendant, the gunplay is relatively passable, and likely why the game has sustained something of a player base for over a year. But in terms of its story, art direction, and quest design, it's just coma-inducingly dull. More to the point, just as expected, the game was widely criticized for its microtransaction implementation, ensuring the core loop is extremely grind-heavy for anyone not ponying up enough money. Everything about this game felt like a total snooze fest, and when you've only got so much time to play in the first place, why give any of that time to something that clearly doesn't respect yours? Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown was the first entry into the once illustrious racing franchise in some 12 years, and though fans wanted to believe it had reclaimed the series' good name, the writing was really on the wall with this one. For starters, the lackluster marketing suggested it to be nothing more than a generic mashup of Forza Horizon, The Crew, and Need for Speed, and then a closed beta clarified that it also suffered from so-so handling, inconsistent driver AI, and a boring game world. Little changed in time for that full release, which was torn to shreds for all these reasons and also a ridiculous always online requirement, ensuring the game was unplayable for many on launch weekend due to server outages. One day, probably not too far from now, Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown will be permanently unplayable whenever publisher Nacon switches off the servers. Game of Thrones King's Road. The beautiful cinematic reveal trailer for Game of Thrones King's Road actually made it look pretty damn good. Finally, someone was getting around to making an open-world AAA action game based on the hallowed IP. But it soon became clear that the excitement was entirely misplaced, and that King's Road was actually a free-to-play game for mobile and PC platforms from Netmarble, the South Korean outfit infamous for producing low-effort gacha slop with aggressive monetization systems. Expectations immediately sank through the floor for King's Road, which, true to form, was chided for its intrusive money-grabbing mechanics, grindy gameplay, and a general lack of polish. While it received some scattered praise for at least attempting to capture the atmosphere of Westeros, this was easily cancelled out by the overwhelming cynicism with which the game was produced, and how that seeped into basically every pore of its gameplay. Drag and Drive. Dragon Drive is definitely a game that most folk wanted to like, given that the multiplayer wheelchair basketball title offered some welcome representation for disabilities in sports. It was tough to mask the disappointment surrounding its unveiling though, with many calling out the drab art direction and tech demo feel of gameplay. Basically, it looked like the Switch 2 had another ARMS on its hands, a potential rich game that just fell short of the mark. That Nintendo quietly dumped the game on their eShop for a pittance didn't help that perception either. Ultimately, Dragon Drive is a generic-looking sports game whose mouse-driven control scheme is more genuinely physically exhausting than enjoyable. Beyond that, the motion controls just aren't responsive enough, and it's also brutally lacking in content, even with that low price. Dragon Drive is a well-intentioned outing that few are going to actually hate, but considering the obvious potential here to serve as a stellar showpiece for the Switch 2's mouse mode, it feels like a caution against it. Silent Hill, the short message. Though the recent Silent Hill 2 remake proved that Konami actually does care about the legendary survival horror franchise, prior to this, the beloved IP had been on the skids for about 15 years. When the publisher shadow dropped a new first-person entry into the series, Silent Hill: The Short Message, it was tough to expect much from it whatsoever. Beyond being released on PlayStation 5 in January 2024, the very same day it was officially announced, it was also free to play. Arriving mere months after Konami's also free interactive web series Silent Hill Ascension stunk up the joint, that delivery method instantly set alarm bells ringing. Plus, given that unflattering screenshots of The Short Message had leaked more than 18 months before release, and the game had been rated in South Korea all the way back in September 2022, it all seemed to suggest the game likely had a troubled development and was being put out there as quietly as possible. It wasn't a shock then when The Short Message was criticized for its awkward, frustrating gameplay, heavy-handed story, and short playtime. At least in the wake of Silent Hill 2 Remake though, it was quickly forgotten about by most die-hard fans. Destiny 2: The Edge of Fate. 2024's Destiny 2 expansion, The Final Shape, truly felt like the end of an era for most players, given that it was billed as the conclusion of the series' decade-long Light and Darkness saga. The content was obviously never going to stop there though, and back in July, Bungie released their next major expansion, The Edge of Fate, which was charged with kicking off the new Fate saga. Many players felt like Bungie should have taken a longer recess and allowed The Final Shape to sit for a while before pressing on with a new chapter, and they were a little bit too overeager in moving on from the franchise's first epoch. Those concerns were writ large when The Edge of Fate released, with the overwhelming consensus being that it was a lackluster expansion, both in terms of its forgettable story and gameplay regressions from The Final Shape. There's a clear vibe of exhaustion among critics and players alike when it comes to Destiny, that if Bungie can't offer up something fresh and interesting, then they shouldn't trot out these half-baked expansions just for the sake of it. Tales of the Shire, a Lord of the Rings game. A cozy Lord of the Rings themed life sim actually sounds like a neat use of the franchise license, though from the moment the reveal trailer of Tales of the Shire dropped, there was plenty of skepticism around its cheap-looking mobile game-esque art style. Beyond this, the reveal trailer suspiciously showed off little honest-to-god gameplay, aside from a few menial activities, so it didn't exactly leave a stellar first impression for most Rings fans. Ultimately, that's because Tales of the Shire is an extremely shallow game, one whose undemanding nature might be fleetingly appealing to those craving comfort food, but tedium soon sets in. Everything here feels like an especially generic rendition of the life sim formula, ensuring that Tales of the Shire functions as a sleeping aid, but less so as an actual video game. Sure, it's not the abject embarrassment that the Lord of the Rings Gollum was, but are we really setting the bar that low for games based on one of the most cherished IPs of all time? Lakamira. There was some scattered excitement for Lakamira considering the unfortunate lack of single-player FPS campaigns today, all the more so as the story was co-created by auteur filmmaker Nicholas Winding Refn. But the gameplay trailers didn't highlight anything even remotely special about the game, which appeared to be drawing aesthetic and gameplay cues from the PS3/360 era, with its muddy color palette and relentlessly bullet-spongy enemies. Lakamira's production has also been tumultuous, having been developed by Ukrainian outfit Reburn, with all the obvious challenges that currently entails, as well as being reverted to an early access launch shortly before release. So while Lakamira's brief but repetitive campaign might scratch the nostalgic itch for those craving some cheesy 2010 era shooter gameplay, it doesn't bring anything fresh or interesting to the table. It's competent to a point, but also feels familiar enough to feel tired in every fiber of its DNA. Skull and Bones. On paper, Skull and Bones should have been an easy win for Ubisoft, a game unapologetically inspired by the acclaimed naval battles in Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. But to call the game's development torrid is quite the understatement. Though unveiled at E3 2017, the seafaring action-adventure game didn't finally release until February 2024, following a development period punctuated by continual delays, lengthy periods of radio silence, and reports that the game's production had stalled numerous times. Ubisoft dubbing the live service title a quadruple A release didn't really help matters either, making it seem as though the publisher was desperately trying to spruce up what appeared to be a $200 million dud in the making. And what a dud it was. Skull and Bones was a stamina-sappingly soulless pirate-themed action game which was defined by repetitive gameplay loops, aggressive live service implementation, myriad technical issues, and a general lack of fun. Spinning Black Flag's pirate combat off into its own game shouldn't have taken an entire decade, and it definitely shouldn't have turned out like this. The House of the Dead 2 Remake. The House of the Dead 2 is one of the most iconic and beloved light gun shooters of all time, and anyone who played it in its heyday was likely excited about the remake. That is, until they remembered it was being developed by Megapixel Studio, the same outfit behind the so-so remake of the first game. So why expect anything different here? The marketing didn't exactly suggest that Megapixel had learned much from their first effort either, and indeed House of the Dead 2's remake fell short of the mark. While the first remake simply wasn't great, this new take on the sequel more acutely misunderstands what made it so appealing back in the day. From its strangely sterile art direction to the baffling decision to strip away much of the original's campy appeal with newly re-recorded dialogue, this remake largely erases the game's nostalgic charms and in turn renders it just another generic zombie shooter. Dollhouse, Behind the Broken Mirror. Survival horror has arguably never been bigger than it is right now, which is great in theory, but also means that fans need to sift through a glut of Me Too also-ran titles to find the quality. And sadly, despite some decent art direction, Dollhouse Behind the Broken Mirror is ultimately just another thunderously forgettable entry with no distinct identity of its own. Make no mistake, the marketing focused on its mildly creepy doll enemies for a reason, which is to say the general exploration, puzzle solving, and combat are all incredibly stock and familiar, while tied to a lackluster level of visual fidelity that quickly dulls the senses. The worst thing you can really say is that once the initial atmosphere wears off, Dollhouse just isn't very scary. It's either straightforward to its detriment or stymied by overpowering clunkiness. Considering how many budget horror titles can do so much with so little, this one just isn't good enough. Funko Fusion. Who could have ever predicted that a game based on junky plastic tat was itself a soulless hollow exercise? Funko Fusion never appeared to be anything more than a charmless rehash of the LEGO video game formula, yet without the singular focus of their franchise-themed games, instead smushing a bevy of popular IP together into one scarcely coherent mess of a third-person adventure game. That is precisely what Funko Fusion is, a tonally schizophrenic brand collision held shakily together by repetitive shooter gameplay and a forgettable story. Though the game accurately recreates the aesthetics of Funko Pops, that's where the praise ends, as this title is thoroughly lacking in creativity, curiosity, and even a basic sense of adventure. Star Wars Episode 1 Jedi Power Battles Remastered. Not gonna lie, I love me some Jedi Power Battles, but I totally get that it never reviewed very well back in the day, which is why you might think going into the remaster that this was also gonna be a quick and easy cash-in. Even with the power of nostalgia goggles and the growing fondness for the Star Wars prequel trilogy among younger generations, it's hard to forgive just how intensely dated Jedi Power Battles is from a gameplay perspective. Despite some quality of life updates, namely modernized controls, the gameplay fundamentals feel just as clunky and stiff as they did 25 years ago, ensuring that neither combat nor platforming are much fun at all. It's also just as infamously difficult as it was back in 2000, ensuring that frustration will set in after a point, and you might struggle to convince yourself to keep going once the nostalgia wears off, which it totally will. Even the most die-hard prequel apologists will dip out of this one before the end. Still Wakes the Deep, Sirens Rest. Still Wakes the Deep was far from a perfect game, but it's nevertheless one of the most atmospheric and downright memorable survival horror gaming experiences of the last few years. It did, however, feel like a pretty open-shut case, a one-off game that didn't present any natural in for a follow-up. And yet, exactly a year after the main game's release, the Chinese Room put out an expansion, Sirens Rest, set 12 years after the events of the original. Between the clear lack of necessity for a follow-up and the fact it was announced just 6 days before release, it was tough to expect all that much from this game. Ultimately, Sirens Rest seemed like an afterthought, with underwhelming writing that added little to the core narrative and a distinct lack of pulse-pounding monster encounters. This felt like something the developer noodled around with once the main game was finished and decided to release it on the off chance that some fans would throw money their way. Sadly though, it does lack the passion, creativity, and pure atmosphere of the first game. Captain Blood. Gather around to hear the tall tale of Captain Blood, a swashbuckling action-adventure game based on Raphael Sabatini's 1922 book of the same name, which began development all the way back in 2003. Though intended to release for the original Xbox and PC in 2006, production was beset by restarts, legal issues, and the intended publisher going bankrupt, leaving Captain Blood effectively dead by 2010. An alum of the original developer Akela announced in 2022 that he planned to revive and finish the title, with it finally released releasing in May 2025. Captain Blood, though, is pretty much what you'd expect from a game that's been collecting dust for the better part of 15 years. Unapologetically of its era, and while you might find the mid-2000s gameplay mildly charming for a few minutes, it can't sustain a full retail price in 2025. If you slapped a pirate theme on the original God of War and then cleaved away its finessed hack-and-slash gameplay along with most of the artistry, you'd end up with Captain Blood. Tamagotchi Plaza. The latest entry into Bandai Namco's Tamagotchi video game franchise should have been an easy slam dunk, given how an adorable Tamagotchi-themed shop sim fits the Nintendo Switch platforms like a glove. It is at least cute and colorful, but the marketing materials didn't suggest that the game was anything more than a stilted series of simple-to-a-fault minigames. These minigames are also infuriatingly repetitive, with little in the way of creative variation, ensuring that its non-budget asking price feels completely outrageous. Given the popularity of the Tamagotchi brand, it feels like a huge missed opportunity that the game doesn't include elements of the traditional Tamagotchi experience, instead focusing on a series of bland, benign minigames. You'll need a serious stomach for repetition not to end up bored by this one in short order, which, given the series' prior popularity and how long it's been since the last game, is hugely disappointing. Mindseye. Open-world sci-fi action and Mindseye seemed mighty suspect from the moment it was first introduced, because while it was directed by GTA producer Leslie Benzies and looked pretty solid visually, the lead-up to release was marred by so many red flags it could have been sold as Red Flag Simulator. For one, it was barely marketed until weeks before it came out. Critics weren't given review codes pre-release, both the CLO and CFO of developer Builder Rocket Boy quit just a week before it came out, and the devs tried to stop people streaming the game on release day. All this considered, it shocked basically nobody that Mindseye was panned into the Earth's core by critics and general players alike, with many accusing the game of being blatantly unfinished, while even more generous takes called it generic at best. Many players ended up seeking refunds, while its player count fell off a cliff within days of release, sinking to double digits on Steam less than 2 weeks after it came out. Ambulance Life, a paramedic simulator. The simulator genre is hugely popular these days, and it's genuinely surprising that it's taken until 2025 for a paramedic sim to arrive on the scene. Though Ambulance Life, a paramedic simulator, was developed by Acer Interactive, the same team behind the acclaimed police simulator Patrol Officers, the marketing definitely suggested that this was going to be a more slipshod, unvarnished production. And that it was, given that the game is defined by its rickety vehicular physics and controls, frustrating abundance of bugs, clunky interface, poor AI, and a listless feeling of repetition. Though Acer could have whipped the game into shape following its woeful launch, that just hasn't happened, leaving many feeling that the developer rushed this one out after their cop sim was a huge success. The potential was definitely there, and arguably still is, and it wouldn't be remotely surprising to see another studio release a far more successful take on the paramedic simulation genre, but this one just isn't it. And that's a collection of various games that you just knew weren't going to land very well. My beloved Mindseye, I still want to believe that thing can be turned around, with Leslie Benzies saying that they're going to be relaunching the game at some point going forward. I'll believe it when I see it. Check out the video that's on screen right now to keep going with various games that were disappointing, and I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com. Thank you so much for listening. I will catch you soon.